Hi, welcome to my talk. My name is Vladimir Jovanovic, and for the past 2 years, I've been working as an Android developer at Flixbus. When I first joined Flixbus, their Android application was in a pretty bad shape. It was one huge monolith app with a bunch of different features added by different people, without much consideration for the app's architecture. I would describe its architecture something like this. So, it was clear from the Android code base that Flixbus was in a full-on startup mode. And that was not the only problem. iOS application was in pretty much same state of despair. About a year and a half ago, we decided that something needed to be done. We were drowning in technical debt. It was a struggle to work on the project. Everything was coupled together. Network, storage, UI. This meant that changing one part of the app would introduce bugs in a seemingly independent part of the code base. And we also had some libraries that we were struggling to update. Because of all of this, onboarding was taking a considerable amount of time. And it was pretty much impossible to onboard juniors. Also, because the app was strongly coupled, this meant that fixing one bug would introduce unknown amount of bugs in random places. And if you watch that one episode of Malcolm in the Middle when Hal is trying to replace the light bulb, that's the best description on how it feels when working on a coupled code base. This meant that features were taking a long time to implement. And because we didn't have a clear picture on how the app's architecture should look like, every new feature had its own architecture. And because every new feature was also relying on some existing part of the code base, if you combine that one with some randomly chosen approach, you get what's known as Frankenstein architecture. And finally, we had a lot of to-dos. Really all to-dos throughout the code base that usually had nothing to do with the code below them. iOS was in the same position, but all of their problems were written in Objective-C. Before we go into how we decided to solve these problems, let's check a couple of information about Flixbus so you can get a better sense of the scale of the problem. Flixbus was founded in 2013 in Germany, and in the following couple of years, it expanded rapidly in the EU market. In 2018, it started operating in the US, and right now we are in the process of expanding to some other markets. Flixbus is trying to own as few buses as possible, and our main business model is to provide network planning, marketing, pricing, quality management, and other customer service to our partner companies. We operate in more than 30 countries and have more than 2,000 stations that are connected by more than 350,000 connections. So far, we transported more than 100 million passengers with the help of our 1,200 employees, 300 network partners, and their 7,000 drivers. IT is a big part of Flixbus business model. There are around 300 people at Flixtech, and most of them are either software developers or data engineers. Mobile teams have 6 developers each, 2 QA, and 1 UX UI designer. Apart from booking funnel, which is the most important part of the app, we also have some other features such as user profile, ticket management system, real-time tracking of the buses, customer support, and many others. Codebases have around 300,000 lines each. And a year and a half ago, those were 300,000 lines of unmaintainable legacy code. As you may have already guessed, Flixbus is not the first company to struggle with legacy code. There is a saying that any given company is either creating or fixing legacy code. Most startups are focused on growth. They don't really care about architecture, scalability, and sustainability of their apps. Features are being added one after another. Teams are growing fast. There is no time to define code style or apps architecture. Just make it work and add a lot of to-dos for later. Because refactoring is not needed to grow, startup companies spend their first years creating legacy code. And don't get me wrong, that's how it should be. There is a reason why you don't know any big companies without technical debt. Companies that focus on refactoring too early inevitably fail because they kill its own growth. You don't want to optimize things before there is a reason for it. You want to put your idea in production as soon as possible and with minimal effort, so you don't spend a lot of money and time working on the idea if it maybe is not going to work. A lot of companies change their business model in the first couple of years, couple of times, and after some time they have product that brings sorry, value to the customers. But at some point, technical debt starts slowing down the company. It becomes painfully slow to add new features, app becomes unstable, it becomes easy to introduce bugs, and so on. It becomes a business problem. As long as it's developers' problem, it's not that important. Developers are used to problems. That's what we do, solve problems. But when it becomes a business problem, that's the time to solve it. You don't want your company being slowed down by refactoring, but you don't want it being slowed down by technical debt either. That's the time when business people should come to developers and politely ask them to fix those small problems that they have in their code bases. And that's not something that you need to ask twice, because developers already asked for the time to refactor like 10 times. And that's what happened at Flixbus. Business became aware that technical debt is slowing down the company's growth. A year and a half ago, Android and iOS teams got a task to fix their code bases. After a lot of meetings, discussions, Android and iOS teams came up with a solution. We are going to, drum roll, what? So having seemingly the same problem, Android and iOS teams decided for different approaches. So let's see what happened. Our code bases were in the same state of chaos, but iOS had one problem that tipped the scale, Objective-C. Us in Android team had much easier time when it comes to decoupling. Our plan was to extract one feature in a separate module, protect it with interfaces, convert it in Kotlin if necessary, add some tests, and that's it. One feature extracted, decoupled, and refactored. At least that's what we thought. Also, we didn't have any pressure to rewrite to Kotlin because Java was and is still supported. So, and most of Android developers know how to write Java code. For the iOS team, it was much harder doing this because of Objective-C. Yes, it's also possible to rewrite to Swift step by step, but keep in mind that Swift came out in 2014 and was adopted by developers really fast. This meant that you would need to find a developer who has a lot of experience and is willing to write Objective-C in 2019. This was hard and expensive. Another problem was that there was only one developer from the old iOS team who stayed, so he would need to onboard everyone to this Objective-C code base that even he didn't fully understand. So they decided to write a new app. So let's see how it went. We can start with the iOS team. The initial estimation that the iOS team had was that they are going to release first version of the app after 6 months. This was at that time seemingly realistic expectation because they managed to get feature freeze. This meant that no new features would be added to the old app, and all manpower and resources would be poured down into the creation of this new app. The first problem was that most of the time in the first weeks and even months was spent on meetings, arguing, making plans. Starting something new is hard because you start making all the important decisions ahead of time. And this inevitably becomes a series of long meetings about nothing. Why nothing? Because there is nothing. You still didn't write a single line of code. You are just having talks at length about how to keep your non-existing code base forever young. But at some point, pressure grows and you have to come up with a plan. After the plan was in place, they started creating legacy code, I mean the new app, in pure Swift. The new version of the app is still not available. It's currently in open beta, 10 months later. And what is the reason for the delay? Well, there are a couple of reasons. First, they underestimated the complexity of the project. There were a lot of small features and things that were not documented that at the end they had to implement. Also, they spent a lot of time on meetings, deciding about, making decisions about apps architecture, code style, all this without writing a lot of code. And then when they finally started writing the code, they realized that they would have to adjust plans in order for them to work. Another reason was that while they were working on the new app, there were a couple of features that they had to add to the old app because of legal reasons and business requirements. So they had to break the feature freeze. Also, they had to cut features out as much as possible in order to release the app as soon as possible to the customers. Because, so basically they left only features that were necessary for booking flow, for buying tickets. So they broke the plan. And finally, because of pressure and time constraints, they decided to port one feature from the old app to the new one. So they, at the end, introduced Objective-C in the old code base. As you can see, rewrite didn't go as planned. New problems arise, plans change, things got more complicated, and at some point, they even had small refactoring of the new app. It would be totally unfair to say that nothing went well. Work on the new app made the iOS team stronger and more stable. Now they don't have any problems attracting new developers and onboarding them. The app is on a good way to get released by the end of the year. And also, the new app has fresh design that is going to be a big improvement when it comes to user experience. And how did Android handle refactoring? Well, we are still refactoring. And it seems that we are going to do it forever, but not in the current capacity. We just don't want to end up in this situation again, in a situation that requires major refactoring of the app. As you may remember, we started with a single module, and our plan was to create something like this. And we are in a good way. We fully extracted network and storage modules, and we are now in the process of extracting some feature modules out of the monolith app. Our current Android project has over 40 modules, but main module still contains more than 50% of the code base. So we are halfway there, basically. In the process of refactoring, we managed to convert around 50% of the code base to Kotlin. And we had much easier times when it comes to refactoring compared to the iOS team. We also spent a lot of time making plans and creating code styles for new apps architecture, but we had to create plan just for a specific feature or a specific module. We didn't have to create plan for the whole app. Because we needed to do refactoring in parallel with new features, we were not able to have long-running refactoring or feature branches. So we decided to use trunk-based development. This means that everything is split into really small tasks, and whenever some task is done, you immediately merge it into the master branch. And if it's not production ready, if that task doesn't complete the whole feature, you hide it behind a feature flag. This way, we had much less merge conflicts in the process, and we also managed to do refactoring and new features in parallel. We also had a lot of issues following this plan. It's really hard to do refactoring with this kind of constraints. So you would start extracting one feature, and then you would realize that it depends on another feature. So you would stop, create task to extract that other feature. Then you would start working on that one, and you would realize that it also depends on 3 other features. And one of them is being modified by another developer because there is a need for a new functionality on that feature. So you see problem here. So what's the solution? Well, solution is patience. You follow this dependency graph as deep as you can. You find small features that don't depend on anything, and you start extracting them first. And whenever you remove something from your monolith app, you make your life easier and your code base cleaner. And then gradually you start climbing up, and now hopefully those upper features also don't depend anything inside your monolith app. As you can see, both approaches have their pros and cons. So let's go through them and see how they compare. First, let's check pros of rewrite. It can be extremely attractive for developers to get the opportunity to work on a new app. So this can be a great way to attract new developers into your company if you have a need. Another is that it's a really nice way and easy way to introduce new technologies into the company. And finally, or hopefully at the end, you will have code base that's in better shape than the old one. But this doesn't necessarily have to happen. And what are the cons of rewrite? Well, new project require, New project requires a lot of planning. And because it's a totally new project, you have to plan everything. You will be not adding any new features into your new app. And usually, as it is case with FlixBus, you will have to remove some features from the new app in order to deliver your app as soon as possible. Next one, there is no direct benefit to the customer. And again, for the same reason. Your new app will have exactly the same set of features as the old one. Some features will get lost in translation. If your old app is not extremely well documented, and let's be clear, it probably isn't, some features will just get forgotten. For example, some autocomplete on some input field or some similar small feature that's hard to document. It takes longer than expected, always. And finally, it's a huge risk. Big rewrite can damage and even kill the company if it goes bad. I think Netscape is one of the best examples of rewrite going bad. And what are the benefits of refactoring? First, you will be delivering constant value to the users. Your capacity will be inevitably reduced by the refactoring, but you are still going to provide your users with support and new features. You will be not losing any knowledge. Your existing app will have some workarounds around bugs on server side or some similar knowledge that's extremely hard to document and replicate. And when refactoring, you will keep your old code base and with it all of its hidden knowledge. It's significantly lower risk. Refactoring can't fail. You will be refactoring until you don't have more capacity or you don't want to proceed, and at that point you can just stop. You will just gradually try to improve your code base on a big level. And finally, it's continuously being user tested. You don't have to wait for a small change or a small feature in order to get released. You don't have to wait for the whole app to get finished and delivered. You will be constantly delivering small features when you are doing refactoring and small changes. And what are the cons of refactoring? Well, first, it's painfully slow. It can take a long time to get your code base at the acceptable level. Next one, it requires careful planning. You cannot do mob refactoring. Well, you can, but you will not improve your code base. So you have to have, you need to have clear plan and following it. Otherwise, you will be refactoring different parts of the app in a different way, and you will end up in a never-ending refactoring hell. And finally, it's hard for developers. Refactoring is not fun, and it requires a lot of patience. So if your team is not stable and experienced, it can fall apart. Keep in mind that the total cost of refactoring is always higher than doing a complete rewrite. But the impact on organization is usually much, much smaller. This highly depends on the size of the company and size of the product. Small projects are easy to throw away and rewrite, and the complexity of rewrite grows exponentially with the size of the project. Some projects just can't be rewritten ever. They are too big, and going for the rewrite would have much bigger impact on the organization than just leaving it at its current state or trying to gradually improve it through refactoring. There is a reason why world still needs COBOL developers. So what should you do? Should you rewrite or refactor? Here we are talking about refactoring and rewrite that's visible to the business. This means long overall refactoring or rewrite of the whole app. You should be doing rewrite and refactoring of small portions of your code base constantly, and that way you may never end up in a situation that requires major rewrite or refactoring. But before we go through the reasons to do rewrite or refactoring, let's first check one reason for which you should almost never do refactoring, and most certainly never do rewrite of the app. The fundamental law of programming is that it's harder to read code than to write it. But it's a bit easier to read it if you had written it, like yesterday. So some people decide to rewrite the app because they didn't write the code. This may seem funny to you, but it's more common than you think. It's usually not formulated like that, but something like this. I don't like the code style. It uses framework 1 and not framework 2, which is like 100 times better. Java sucks. I don't understand anything in this code base. All of these are valid reasons to improve your code base, but are not valid enough to halt feature development. Whenever you have problems with your code base, ask yourself who is impacted by those problems and by that code base. If it's just you, the developer, and business and users are not, you should be fixing those problems without impacting business or users. When picking the solution for your company, put the company's needs in the first place. You should not be solving developers' problems when doing major rewrite or refactoring. But let's say that in your case, code is horrible, business is suffering, and you have to solve it. What should you do? Should you do rewrite or refactoring? Here I have created a simple decision tree that will help you decide. So, first question. Is your code base really that bad? If it's not, start refactoring. You should rewrite the app only if it's much, much harder to refactor than to rewrite, like 5 times harder. Some things that are usually considered as a bad code base are in reality not as bad as they may seem. For example, if your code is slow and unoptimized, usually 10% of code base is responsible for 90% of the speed. So you don't have to rewrite the whole app in order to drastically improve its performance. Another often given reason is that the architecture is bad. Yes, it can be really boring and quite cumbersome to fix apps architecture, but it can be done relatively easily. You just need to see it as a new challenge, plan it appropriately, and do it step by step. But let's say that your code is really that bad. So let's go to the next question. Okay. Will there be a need to add new features to the existing app while working on the new one? If yes, start refactoring. Writing new app and adding features to the old app is a common trap. There are a couple of problems with that. First one is that if you can add features to your old code base, then it's not really that bad. Second one is that you will have a hard time achieving feature parity. Whenever you think you are done with your new app, there will be feature in the old one that's just been added. And finally, you will have unhealthy competition between your people who are working on the old app and the one creating the new one. But let's say that you are able to get the feature freeze. So next question. Do you need more than 6 months to rewrite the app? If the answer is yes, you should be doing refactoring. First, your estimation is wrong, like really wrong. How do I know that? Well, you have a hard time understanding your old code base, and yet you need to recreate all of its features into the new app. Are you sure that you know all of its features? Are you sure that there is a better way to handle those legacy endpoints on the server side? Maybe adding GraphQL on top of everything will just make things worse. So just accept it. Your estimation is wrong, and keeping users without support for that long is never a good thing. But let's say that you have a rock star team that can do it in 3 months. Should you rewrite the app now? Yes, but still be careful. Rewrites are seldom the real answer. You can refactor most of your code base without losing anything and without much of the risk. But once you start rewrite, you're putting everything at risk. It's important to remember that when you start from scratch, there is absolutely no reason to believe that you are going to do a better job. You probably don't even have the same team that worked on the version 1, so you don't have more experience on the project. You are just going to make most of the old mistakes again and introduce some new ones that are not there in the original version. When refactoring, you always have working code. You're not throwing away business knowledge or some obscure bug fixes, and developers aren't starting from scratch hoping that they can make things work. In other words, you're minimizing risk. Newer isn't always better, and that idea that new code is better than the old one is pretty absurd. Old code has been used and it has been tested. Bug fixes have been found and they have been fixed. While rewrite always seems like a perfect choice, like an opportunity to make everything better, to avoid all the mistakes from the old code base, restrain yourself and pick the solution that's best for your company. Rewriting the app should be your last option. And that's it from me. Here are the credits, and thank you. If you would like to join Flixbus, here is the link. And if you would like recommendation, here are my details. Also, I will be uploading these slides here. And questions?